Brown has announced he intends to step down as Labour leader, but will continue temporarily as Prime Minister as he tries to form a new government. Speaking in Downing Street, Mr Brown said the Liberal Democrats had asked to open formal negotiations with Labour. When the issue of who forms the government is settled, Mr Brown will go.
But I have no desire to stay in my position longer than is needed to ensure the path to economic growth is assured and the process of political reform we have agreed moves forward quickly.
Mr Brown's statement came after a day which ended with the Liberal Democrats saying there was still no deal with the Conservatives.
And this discussion is dependent not only on the Liberal Democrat Party, but also on the proposals and discussions that are ongoing with the Conservative Party and the representations that, frankly, are being made by the Labour Party.
And right now in the House of Commons, Conservative MPs are meeting David Cameron. Where does this leave his bid for government? We'll have the latest from Westminster, where the Cabinet is meeting and Britain's political future hangs in the balance. Good evening and welcome to BBC's News at 6 from Westminster on a day of high drama in British politics. Within the past hour, Gordon Brown has said he intends to stand down as Labour leader and Prime Minister. In a dramatic statement, Mr Brown said he would step down in the national interest, but only after he oversees talks with Liberal Democrats aimed at forming a new Labour-Liberal Democrat government. I'm joined now by our political editor, Nick Robinson. What an extraordinary day. It's all changed just in the last hour.
That's right. It's an audacious bid by Gordon Brown to keep Labour in power. And let's be clear, George, to keep himself in power for a limited time. But it's something bigger than that. It is a bid to reshape the very shape of British politics, creating a coalition the like of which we have not seen since the Second World War, in which senior Liberal Democrats would sit around a cabinet table, at first with Gordon Brown as Prime Minister, but within 6 months with another alternative leader. It raises lots of questions, of course. The legitimacy of this arrangement, should Gordon Brown survive since his party effectively lost the election, the legitimacy of an unelected figure becoming Prime Minister in future, also the issue of whether it can really be strong and stable given the parliamentary numbers.
Well, you say it's going to change the shape of British politics, but where to now? What happens next?
Well, if it happens, it will change it, because we're in the bizarre situation where the Liberal Democrats today reported back that they were having extremely successful negotiations with the Conservative Party. They were pleased with their progress, and they just wanted to get a little bit more detail, they said, on their ideas on voting reform and education, on tax. Not the slightest hint from that they had major disagreements. So the dilemma for Nick Clegg tonight is, does he walk away, in which case how does he explain it to the public, or does he stick with his position, in which case how does he explain it to his party, many of whom crave to do a deal with Labour and loathe the idea of going into power with the Tories.
All right, Nick, we'll be talking to you again in the rest of the programme, but thank you for the moment. Thank you. Well, as we've heard, the announcement by the Prime Minister came at the end of a day which began focusing on the prospect of an agreement between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, as our Deputy Political Editor James Landale now reports.
After 3 days of uncertainty, 3 days of inconclusive talks and 3 days of silence from Gordon Brown, today this extraordinary announcement.
As we know, the Liberal Democrats felt that they should first talk to the Conservative Party. Mr Clegg has just informed me that while he intends to continue his dialogue that he has begun with the Conservatives, he now wishes also to take forward formal discussions with the Labour Party. I believe it is sensible and it's in the national interest to respond positively.
He's Prime Minister for now, but will stand aside come what may.
I therefore intend to ask the Labour Party to set in train the processes needed for its own leadership election. I would hope that it would be completed in time for the new leader to be in post by the time of the Labour Party conference. I will play no part in that contest. I will back no individual candidate.
At the start of the day, the Liberal Democrat leader asked for patience.
I don't think a prolonged period of uncertainty is a good thing. That's why I want to arrive at a decision. We want to arrive at a decision as soon as possible. But I hope people will equally understand that it would be better to get the decision right rather than rushing into something which won't stand the test of time.
And this afternoon it emerged that the Lib Dem leader had met both David Cameron and Gordon Brown during the day, though the Tory leader was unaware of this meeting as he was of secret Liberal negotiations with Labour. Still hopeful they could end up in Downing Street, the Tories turned up for yet more negotiations, spending yet more hours trying to secure a deal with the Lib Dems, discussions that appeared to end on a positive note.
Well, we've made further progress in our meetings with the Liberal Democrats this morning. On our part, we're now going to report back to David Cameron again and to have meetings with our parliamentary colleagues. And the negotiating teams are working really well together.
Both Lib Dems and Tories then headed back to the Commons to consult their colleagues.
Will you get the support of your party?
That was the key question, and after a 2-hour meeting of Lib Dem MPs and peers, it was clear that that support was not yet there.
The parliamentary party has agreed that the central priority must be to form a strong and stable government in the national interest. The parliamentary party agreed that the proposals that have been discussed with the Conservative Party and that were aired today reflect very good progress on a number of points, but they have also asked for clarification of details in relation to education funding, in relation to fair taxes, and in relation to issues in regard to voting reform.
Keeping away from the cameras, David Cameron arrived at the Commons to tell a meeting of his MPs and peers this evening the state of the talks and whether a deal with the Lib Dems was still possible or whether they face yet more years in opposition. Tonight, the Cabinet is meeting here in Downing Street. If the gamble their leader has taken works, the Labour Party might just stay in power. But with talks on all sides continuing, just who will end up running the country is still far from clear. Whatever happens, it won't be Gordon Brown. James Landell, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, any deal made by the leaders and the negotiating teams needs the backing of MPs, and some of those who've just been elected now find themselves in a situation which is unprecedented in a generation. Our political correspondent, Rita Chakrabarti, has been assessing the mood.
Gordon Brown faced the inevitable today. Defeat at the polls was, he accepted, a judgment on him. With more of his MPs calling on him to go, the time he had to accept had finally come. Westminster had been focused on the drama of talks between the Lib Dems and the Tories, but news that Gordon Brown was stepping down had political friends and foes rushing forward with their reactions.
Gordon was always pretty clear that he didn't win that election. And I think the way he's conducted himself since then has genuinely been about trying to steer the country through this very odd constitutional situation, which none of us have really experienced before. David might have done, but my generation, Andrew's generation, we haven't.
It's a big, brave decision. I think it's the right decision for him, the right decision for the country, and the right decision for the Labour Party. And it allows us to move forward.
As for the race to succeed Mr Brown, the Foreign Secretary David Miliband is almost certain to throw his hat into the ring. His brother Ed, the Energy Secretary, could make it a family contest. The School Secretary Ed Balls, who's close to Gordon Brown, is a likely runner, and so is the party's Deputy Leader Harriet Harman. Did Mr Brown fall on his sword to allow Labour to open formal talks with the Lib Dems? That's unclear, but the Transport Secretary said the two parties were close in many ways.
We are very close together, Labour and the Liberal Democrats. This would be a partnership of principle. I believe it has the capacity to form a strong, stable government, able to take on Britain's economic and political challenges, and we will go into those negotiations determined to make them succeed on behalf of the British people.
Gordon Brown's resilience to his own unpopularity earned him an almost grudging respect. Today he's admitted it's for others to lead his party and the country, and that finally the game for him is up. Rita Chakrabarti, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, Nick Robinson is with me again. Nick, we know now there's a cabinet meeting going on just down there. One of those men is going to be chairing it. Some of the others are going to want the top job. It's extraordinary.
Well, it's even more bizarre than you suggest there, George. We are going to see these men sitting around the cabinet table, looking at each other, wondering who will run, but wondering something much more fundamental. What job are they actually running for? Are they running to be Prime Minister, or are they running to be Leader of the Opposition? None of that is yet clear. And therefore Labour's choice of who they want would be completely different. Even more odd is Liberal Democrats tonight thinking, do we go with this proposal to create a coalition government, or don't we? Don't know who it is that they would be going into bed with. We all know as voters it's Gordon Brown temporarily. Who on earth will it be afterwards? We simply don't know. Now, there's no doubt those in the Labour Party who wanted this form of coalition are keenest on David Miliband, the Foreign Secretary. But of course, it won't be the Liberal Democrats who choose, it won't be the voters who choose, it will actually be an electoral college of Labour Party members.
All right, Nick, for the moment, thank you again. Thank you. Well, Gordon Brown has been a resident of Downing Street for some 13 years. First, of course, as Chancellor at number 11, before moving into number 10 in 2007. Being Prime Minister was the job he always wanted. Yet the last 3 years have been the most difficult and embattled of his political career. Gary O'Donoghue looks back at his career.
After 10 years waiting in the wings, Gordon Brown was cheered as he left the Treasury for Downing Street in the summer of 2007, replacing Tony Blair without a contest, promising change and renewed trust in government.
I will try my utmost. This is my promise to all of the people of Britain.
It was the fulfilment of a long-held dream. He brought with him what he called his moral compass, instilled by his father, a church minister. From his early years at Kirkcaldy High School, he was a high achiever with a social conscience. At Edinburgh University, he was heavily involved in student politics. And after his election in 1983, he swiftly rose through the ranks, promoted to the shadow cabinet by Neil Kinnock, along with his friend and rival, Tony Blair. But when John Smith died suddenly in 1994, it was Blair who became Labour leader. At an infamous dinner at this London restaurant, Mr Brown agreed to stand aside, but the details of the deal haunted the New Labour project. Gordon Brown has always been a driven and private politician, but his life changed with marriage to Sarah Macaulay. He's spoken movingly about the death of their first daughter and about his two sons, one of whom has cystic fibrosis. As Chancellor, Mr Brown gave the Bank of England independence and enjoyed initially prolonged growth and low inflation. He wielded control over large areas of domestic policy. But within weeks of becoming Prime Minister, he faced acts of terrorism, foot and mouth, and floods across the country. Encouraged by good poll ratings and colleagues, he toyed with calling a snap election, but he hesitated and eventually called it off.
I'll not be calling an election, and let me explain why. I have a vision for change in Britain.
Rows over political donations and the loss of public data dealt further blows to his authority.
The House has noticed the Prime Minister's remarkable transformation in the last few weeks from Stalin to Mr Bean.
And he had to admit his abolition of the 10p tax rate was a mistake.
We've listened to what people are saying about the effects on different groups, and we've made the changes as a result of that.
And soon his reputation for economic competence was called into question as the credit crunch began to bite. Northern Rock suffered the first run on a major British bank in recent history.
Well, that's it from us for the moment. There'll be more later on in the programme, but on this extraordinary day, let's join Fiona now in the studio.
George, thanks very much. Well, today's other news now, and the developments in Westminster have been watched closely by the city. A massive bailout plan for the euro has eased some of the uncertainty. I'll have more on that in a moment. And today the markets in London have been stable, but might that now change in the light of the dramatic announcement from Downing Street? Our chief economics correspondent Hugh Pym is here. So Hugh, what are the markets thinking?
Well, early today, Fiona, they were very much focused on what was going on in the Eurozone and the big programme of aid that's going to help the banking system there. The markets tend to focus on one thing at a time. They were, if you like, giving a bit of a breather to what was going on down at Westminster, although people I talked to were still pretty uneasy about the situation. One of them made the point, we've got a very large budget deficit and no government, and that was clearly troubling them, although there was a sense of giving it a day or two. Since that announcement at 5 o'clock, with the revelation that talks will very much get underway between Labour and the Liberal Democrats, the market reaction's been very interesting. The pound has fallen a cent against the dollar. One of the other indicators, the government bond price, if you like, the government share price, that's fallen as well, because I think it's really going to heighten nerves now that this thing could drag on for more than a few days. The city don't like uncertainty. Tonight's developments create more uncertainty. There could be very interesting moves in the market tomorrow morning.
OK, Hugh, well, we shall watch that and see. Thanks very much indeed. Well, stock markets around the world rose today after European finance ministers approved a massive financial rescue plan designed to prop up the euro and prevent the economic crisis in Greece from spreading. The measures bolstered the euro, which rose sharply against the dollar and the pound. Here's our Europe editor, Gavin Hewitt.
A massive war chest has been established to defend the euro. Its size is without precedent, but Europe's leaders feared that the debt crisis that began in Greece was on the verge of spreading and undermining the global economic recovery. So today, stock markets have risen sharply, the euro has strengthened, and the cost of borrowing has fallen.
It's a good start, but we will have to do a reality check, and as you know, perception is reality, and hopefully the perception will stand up to that challenge.
The deal has set aside 750 billion euros to defend the single currency. 60 billion of that will come from European Union funds. 440 billion euros from Eurozone countries will guarantee loans to those nations in difficulty. And the IMF is topping up the package with another 250 billion. If the rescue fund is used, it's the Germans who will end up providing the bulk of the money, and many of them are unhappy.
Germany will end up paying for other countries like Spain and Portugal. It will be very difficult for Germany. The problem is we're members of a single currency.
We are paying most of the contributions to the EU budget. We have now the largest share in rescue packages, so I believe we are the paymasters.
Just 20 years ago, none of these stores were here because this was East Germany, and Germans have spent 1.8 trillion euros reuniting their country. Just one reason why they're so reluctant to bail out the Eurozone. So, increasingly, Germans are anxious as to what the future holds for their currency.
Right now there's a lot of fear in Germany that the euro is going to get weaker and that the whole thing is going to fall apart.
Today the euro was given a breathing space, but the fundamental doubt remains as to how countries so different as Greece and Germany can share a single currency. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Berlin.
British Airways cabin crew are to go on strike from next week. The Unite union announced that the strikes will be almost continuous over 20 days. Our transport correspondent Richard Scott is at Heathrow this evening. Richard, air passengers must have thought it was bad enough with the ash cloud, and now this.
Well, absolutely, and the union must have felt that its previous strike of 3 days and then another 4 days wasn't effective enough, because now it really has pushed that nuclear button. We've got 20 days of strike action starting next Tuesday, May the 18th, and running right the way through until June the 9th. There are 3 individual days within that period which aren't strike days, but it'll be impossible for British Airways to run a full service on those days. And you'll have noticed as well that those dates encompass not only the bank holiday at the end of this month, but also half term. So there are going to be hundreds of thousands of passengers affected by this. And the bad news is that things actually seem to be getting worse between the two sides. The union Unite has announced today that it's going to be carrying out another strike ballot over the disciplinary action that British Airways has taken against its staff during this dispute, and over the removal of travel perks from those staff who have gone on strike. So we could end up with a situation quite easily where there are 2 separate disputes running in tandem, and that means, of course, that there are 2 separate disputes which need to be solved.
OK, Richard Scott at Heathrow, thanks very much. And a case of price fixing against 2 British Airways employees has collapsed after what the judge called manifest failures by the Office of Fair Trading. It centred on allegations that BA had colluded with Virgin Airways in fixing the cost of fuel surcharges on flights. The case has been dropped following an admission in court that a year's worth of emails had been discovered that went to the heart of the case and that had not been disclosed to the defence. After the case, one of the men accused gave this reaction.
For many, many years in my working life, my dream job was to be head of PR for British Airways. Sadly, that came to an end because of this case. PR is in my blood, and I'd now like to just get on with rebuilding my career.
The Royal Bank of Scotland says it plans to cut 2,600 more jobs over the next year, mainly in its insurance sector. RBS, which is 84% owned by the taxpayer, has already announced around 23,000 job losses since its government bailout. The bank said it would try to keep compulsory redundancies to an absolute minimum. Thousands of primary school children in England missed sitting their SATs test today because of a boycott by some members of the 2 main teaching unions. The unions want enough tests to be cancelled to make it impossible to draw up this year's school league tables, which they claim do not actually reflect pupils' performance. Here's our education correspondent, Sarah Campbell.
2 schools, but only one is handing out this year's official test papers. The other is boycotting them.
45 minutes later, and with their reading skills tested, these pupils in southwest London next face SATs in maths and writing.
I think I did OK because I've been practicing a lot at home.
I think they're important because it tells you what kind of stage you are at.
If we didn't have them, you might be put in the wrong set and it might be a little too challenging for you.
Dropped in Wales and Northern Ireland and never taken in Scotland, the high-stakes nature of SAT tests have long troubled England's head teachers. How these 11-year-olds have done in their SATs will not only determine the position of their school in the league tables, but will also influence the decision of Ofsted inspectors when they come to make a judgment about the whole school. That emphasis on results is why this primary school in Leicester has supported the boycott, keeping this year's papers firmly under lock and key.
We've got to give out data, we've got to know what our schools are doing, but let's base it on proper evidence, not just a few minutes test at the end of 8 years. Let's look at the whole picture of what the child's being taught.
As with teachers, support for SATs amongst parents is mixed.
They get the children prepared for the secondary school. I think the younger you can start them off thinking about exams, and I don't think that pressure is a bad thing.
I didn't feel that they were really a true justification of the school or what's going on, really.
A gym lesson rather than SATs here in Halifax, one of at least 2,000 primary schools known to be taking part in the boycott. Support has been lower than the unions predicted, but will still be enough to seriously disrupt this year's national tests. Sarah Campbell, BBC News.
Now we'll hear more from George down at Westminster. There's extraordinary developments today in a moment. But first, let's take a look at the weather. Helen Willits is here. Hi, Helen.
Hi there, Fiona. Would you believe how cold it's been by day? I suppose we should expect it to be cold by night. And yes, that is the main theme of the weather, if you like, for the next couple of days. Frosty nights, potentially damaging frosts, of course, so late in the year. Now, we've also got some showers. And yes, believe it or not, we're talking about some snow in those showers across Scotland. But here's the main theme for the night. Look at that frost developing, the blue. Northern Ireland and Scotland, and even temperatures of 2 or 3 degrees in southern areas. That's low enough for a frost on the grass at this time of year, so don't be surprised if you wake up to some ice on the windscreens first thing. But some sunshine as well, as you can see. But then, again, that sunshine gets going and we'll see the showers developing. Fairly concentrated, I think, across the north of England, for example, and the Midlands. Quite a number of showers here. And again, it's going to be chilly. Those showers also develop across East Anglia and the southeast of England after a fairly promising start. If anything, in the south, temperatures might be a degree or two down on those of today, given the fact that we're bringing in some northeast winds once again. Perhaps some coastal areas in the south and west will see some sunshine, but again the showers will spring up inland, as they will across the south and the east of Wales. Some sharp showers, I should say, as well for Northern Ireland, the odd rumble of thunder potentially, and don't rule out some sleet and snow over the tops of the Moor Mountains, perhaps the Pennines, and also across the Scottish Highlands as well. So yes, it may well be May, but it certainly feels much colder. And a cold start again on Wednesday morning with a frost, if anything, a bit colder, and then the showers get going again. But then a change as we head into Thursday. More significant rain will start to roll in off the Atlantic for Scotland and Northern Ireland. But that theme of frosty starts continues, but also some decent weather, as you can see, in southern and eastern areas, at least to start the day on Thursday. So beware, gardeners, if you've planted something outside which might be delicate, because we are expecting some frost by night. That's all from me. I'll hand you back to George now.
Helen, thank you very much. And welcome back to Westminster on the day when Gordon Brown announced he's to stand down as Prime Minister and Labour leader. Let's go over to Downing Street now and talk to our correspondent there, Ian Watson. Ian, what's a reaction from Labour MPs? What's a mood there in the party?
Well, I think there's two interesting developments to this story tonight, George. First of all, I understand there's going to be cabinet-level scepticism over the idea of any deal with the Liberal Democrats. Just because Gordon Brown mentioned a progressive alliance earlier on today doesn't mean to say every member of the Cabinet is signed up to it. The Cabinet are meeting currently, and there will be an argument over whether any kind of deal would backfire, as though Labour perhaps were trying to steal the election because they came second and the Liberal Democrats came third. So the Prime Minister will have to win those members of the Cabinet over who are sceptical. The second development is that I understand the Prime Minister is just about now telling the people around the Cabinet table not to launch immediate leadership elections. He's telling them that that would look undignified and it may undermine Labour's message of economic stability. So don't come out onto the steps of 10 Downing Street and announce that you're standing as Labour leader. That's his message to his Cabinet colleagues tonight.
All right, Ian, thank you very much. Now, just in the last half an hour or so, the Liberal Democrat leader Nick Clegg has been making a statement. Let's have a listen to that.
Over the last 4 days, we've been working flat out to
seek and reach an agreement on the stable government that lasts, that I think the British people want and deserve. We've had some very constructive talks with the Conservative Party, and I'm very grateful to David Cameron and his negotiating team. We've had some very positive talks, made a great deal of progress, but we haven't yet reached a comprehensive partnership agreement. And that is why, given the urgency of the need to have a resolution to this whole situation, we think it's the right thing, the responsible thing, to now open talks on exactly the same basis as we've been having with the Conservative Party, with the Labour Party, whilst of course continuing our discussions with the Conservatives.
Well, that was Nick Clegg talking just a little while ago. Well, with me now is Alistair Campbell, former Director of Communications at Number 10. This is extraordinary, isn't it? A coalition of the losers, the party that came third and the party that came second, intending to form a government for Britain.
What all that's happened today is that Nick Clegg has indicated to Gordon Brown that as he continues his discussions with the Tories, he can also have discussions with the Labour Party. And the reality is nobody won the general election. The public sent a very complicated and quite confused message. And I thought what Gordon did today brilliantly and with great nobility and dignity, he brought sense to that situation. He's basically saying that it's perfectly proper that the Tories and the Liberal Democrats continue to see if they can form a government. If not, there's this other option. It may come to nothing, and if not, you're left with a minority Tory governments. And none of these are the options that the leaders wanted.
You talk about the public, well, the one thing the public couldn't have been thinking of was that you get these two people, Nick Clegg and Gordon Brown, who came second and third, forming a government. That wasn't their plan.
Hold on a minute. Not that long ago, you were all quoting out as opinion polls where people said they wanted a hung parliament. They've got a hung parliament, and what happens in a hung parliament is that the parties then have to see whether they can work together, compromise, form governments. That's how it works. Now, it may be complicated, it may be not what we're used to after lots of big Tory majorities followed by lots of big Labour majorities under Tony Blair, but it's what we've got. And I think that where I think it's coming from in terms of where the Lib Dems are is that they know a lot of their activists are people who voted Lib Dem to keep the Tories out.
OK, Alistair Campbell, thank you very much. Nick, let's get a last word with you. I've got to ask you, where does this leave David Cameron and the Tories?
Well, they are the big actors on the stage that we haven't heard from. And the reason is they were due to meet now at 6 o'clock with David Cameron addressing Conservative MPs. I think they will be furious at what's gone on, and they will point out that Alistair Campbell, who's next to me, unelected, Peter Mandelson, who was involved in this, unelected, Lord Adonis, who was one of the key players in the talks, unelected, and they will claim that this is illegitimate. And they have to decide concessions to the Liberal Democrats for a deal or try and govern on their own.
All right. Nick Robinson, Alistair Campbell, thank you both. Thank you very much. And a reminder that there's more on today's continuing political drama later this evening. David Dimbleby will be here at Westminster for a special programme, and that'll be at 8:30 here on BBC One. So it's been a historic day here at Westminster. Gordon Brown has announced he's to stand down as Labour leader and Prime Minister. There's been intense political manoeuvring on all sides. The Liberal Democrats are now in formal talks with both Labour and the Conservatives about forming a new government. There's continuing coverage of all the drama on the BBC's news channel through the evening. But for now, it's goodbye from Westminster and time to join our news teams where you are. Goodbye.